Welcome to the Women's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? In our everyday lives, we're always trying to convince somebody to do something for us. It is one form of selling. And with me is a superstar in her field. And I would like to welcome Carol Super. Carol, so nice to meet you, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Let's start out with, what exactly do you do?
Well, presently, I am the top salesperson at a division of Time Warner known as Media Networks, where we sell local ads into national magazines.
How long have you been doing this?
Well, I'm only 26, so I know these numbers aren't going to make sense, but it's been over 20 years.
20 years, wow. So how did you get to be the top saleswoman in what you're doing?
Well, first, before I was in sales, I was a teacher.
Okay.
And I found out very quickly that even though you had maybe wonderful things to offer these students, they weren't always that interested in what you had to offer. So it was your job to get them interested.
How did you accomplish that?
By being interested in them.
Ah.
By showing them that I cared about their music, their home, their girlfriends, boyfriends, their lives.
So that just automatically translated into when you moved out of teaching into the business world, you carried those skills with you?
Absolutely.
And what do you find is the key element there?
Well, I think the key element is really caring about another person, caring about helping another person, and getting into that other person's world. Really listening to them, trying to find out their needs.
All right. I sell real estate.
Okay.
How do I get into the buyer's head or even the seller's head?
Well, that's a good question, because the very first thing you have to do is, of course, ask someone what they're looking for.
Right.
You know, the questions, I always remember the first person that tried to sell me an apartment here in New York. He dropped me off in the old Chelsea, when Chelsea had vials of crack on the lawn, and I go, why would you bring me here? You never asked me what was important to me. And of course, in New York City, you have to have priorities. You can't have everything. So as a real estate salesperson, I know you wouldn't be as successful as you are if you didn't ask people what they were interested in, what was important for them in a house.
Absolutely, because if you could be spending all your time searching for something that they don't care about.
Right.
So I know I ask a lot of questions, but I'm always willing to learn more.
Right. Well, one of the things is, the reason my book is entitled Selling Without Selling is because I've never been sold.
All right.
My real estate salesperson didn't sell me my house. What she did was brought me to the right house for me.
But how did she bring you to the right house?
Well, I think for her it was kind of happenstance, but one of the things is she was very persistent. Okay. She wasn't like the #1 person, but she did have that quality of, okay, well, this isn't right for you, so what would you like better about it? So she kept pressing me, and as I kept, giving her more details, she finally found the house that, of course, I fell in love with.
Would you suggest this is good for everybody when they're selling something to somebody?
Well, of course, you want to ask someone what's important to them. That's really a key, finding out what's important to someone. And of course, you can't say, Barry, what's important to you? You look at me, I goes, a nutter there. But one thing I found is that you ask these couple of softball questions first.
For example?
Well, I meet you, Barry. So how long have you been doing the show?
Right.
And then you'll tell me, oh, and what did you do before that? So I'll know how long you've been doing something, where you were before, what's your level of expertise, that type of thing, so that I can find out. Then the third question, so when you're producing a show, what do you think is the most important thing about producing that show for you? And knowing that, I would then come back and key on what's important to you.
So you're asking a lot of little questions to get to the bigger questions.
That's right. The softball to get to the real question.
To make the home run.
Right, exactly.
What other skills do you need when you're dealing with people to get the information out of them, because some people say, when I see it, I'll know it, or I'm just looking, and those are the kinds of people you kind of push to the side because you're really wasting your time and effort.
Well, one of the things is that I've always done is to prepare before I go to see anyone. Mm-hmm. I ask them, I prepare the kinds of questions that I'll need to know to find out the information that I want. So it's a question of preparation as well.
And once you have all this information, then you search and find what they're doing, what they want rather.
Right.
But what else do you put into the equation?
Well, it's not just asking questions, for sure. That's why the book is 4.5 steps to success.
Okay, we just did one.
Yes, that was the inquiry step, which is probably the most difficult area. Asking the right questions, getting people to feel, comfortable with you is also part of the equation. And step number 1 is your attitude.
So you have to have a positive attitude.
It's a positive attitude and an attitude of, I think also of service. Mm-hmm. Because if you're selling something, you have something to offer someone. It's not selling them, you're offering something. So you've got to think about what's wonderful about what you have to offer and how you can share that with the person across from you.
Different personality types that you have to deal with when you're analyzing how you can share something with or convince somebody that this is the best that is out there or this is the best thing for them.
You read my book. Absolutely. What step number 2 is, you led right to it, is what I call the rapport building step. Okay? It includes things like observation. Mm-hmm. Just actually looking around, seeing what's important to that person. If you're in their office, for example, do they have pictures of their kids? Do they have pictures of the trophies that they've won? Because this tells you a lot about the kind of person that you might be meeting. And also, you're going to try to do what I call the super theory of relativity.
Please explain what this is.
Well, it's really simple. And the reason I call it the super theory of relativity is because it sounds like Einstein's relativity, right?
Right.
Well, when I was a little girl, my mother told me that when she was in Germany, that's where she was born, she was very ill, and they had to take her to the big city, to Stuttgart, to see her cousin, who was a physician, and his name was Dr. Einstein. And I said, Dr. Einstein, Mommy, is he related to the Albert Einstein? And she said, yes, he's a cousin. So I said, that makes you a cousin and me a cousin of Albert Einstein. And she said, yeah. So I believed my mother, of course. And like Albert's theory of relativity, mine's very provable. It's something that really is simple, but his isn't so easy to understand. Mine's a lot easier. And what it is there are 3 steps that I say in understanding the personality of another person.
What are the 3 steps?
Okay. First, you need to determine when you meet someone, are they warm or are they cool? Now that's easy, right, Barry?
Not really.
Really? Well, it's true. Some people are more complicated. You're absolutely right. But often, when someone says, hey, come on in, have a seat, and so forth, you know that they're a warm type.
Right.
But if they say, please sit down and, implies, don't get too close, you kind of have the idea that they are a more reserved type of individual. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you keep that in mind. Then you look and you say, is this the New York type or is this the more laid-back LA type? So the New York type likes to tell you what to do, and the LA type is a much more of an asker type, right? They would be the one to say, hey, Barry, where would you like to go to lunch? Where the New York type would say, Barry, there's a great restaurant that you might enjoy. Okay?
Oh, that's interesting.
All right? So warm or cool, New York or LA. Then, to put this together, you have to decide what iconic type they are. And how you do that is, if you meet someone and, for example, they're warm,
all right,
but they're very assertive, the New York type that likes to tell you what to do, I call that person the Oprah type. Very assertive, actually speaks with their hands a lot, has a big picture This is the big picture person. She doesn't want to see the details. She wants a vision, of that house. Describe it for her. She'd love it. Then, if you meet someone and they're warm, but they're much more laid back, the LA type of individual, I call that person the Al Roker type.
What do you mean by the Al Roker type?
Al Roker is so sociable, so charming. He's always asking you questions like, well, where are you from? What part of town? Do you like the West Side? He's always finding out about you. He's a real caring individual. His ego is kind of parked. Oprah's is right up there. But the Al Roker type really cares about what other people are thinking. He's much more of a consensus builder. So to appeal to his ego would do no good for an Al Roker. Okay? Oprah, yes. Al, no. So if you meet someone and they're warm, they're either one of two types of personalities. If they're warm and assertive, they're the Oprah type. If they're warm and more laid back, I call them the Al Roker type.
Can an Al Roker or an Oprah be an LA type of person?
Well, an Al Roker is an LA type. I call that more laid back, okay?
All right.
The LA type. And the New York type I call the Oprah type. So it's nice, instead of going warm New York, I go Oprah. Warm LA, Al Roker. It's so easy, so simple to kind of figure out someone's personality. Now, if you meet that more reserved individual who's cool and doesn't exactly say as much as a more warm type of individual. And by the way, there's nothing good or bad about being warm or cool. It's just the way people are. It's your personality. Especially if you're warm and you're that New York type, I call that person the Donald. Okay,
now I also noticed that the Donald gave you your quote for your book.
Yes.
How did you do, let's sidetrack a minute, well, not sidetrack, step aside a second. How did you get him to give you a quote for your book?
It's really simple.
You called up and asked?
Absolutely.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I actually wrote him a note.
All right.
And my co-author and wonderful husband, Ron Gold, drafted a wonderful letter that was complimentary to him as the Donald type. His ego is very important, just like the Oprah, and said, people are very interested in what you have to say. And we'd like to know your opinion of what makes a great salesperson. And his answer was incredible. It's nothing at all what I think people would think is the Donald's answer.
So what is the answer?
Wouldn't you think it's like sell, 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 close that sale?
No, I don't think so.
You're right. It's believe in your product, 100, or what you're selling or offering, 100%, not 99, 100%.
Very interesting.
Isn't that interesting? And a Donald type, again, this assertive type wants to get things done. Okay, they have their really advantages because they like to be in control. And now when you find a Donald, you let that Donald be in control. You offer them options. So when you're showing them the home that you think might be good for them, you'd say, now, how would you like this one, or what about the other one? Never one thing for a Donald. They like to be the one to choose. Okay, they want the ball in their court. And then, so we now have cool New York type. So our final and fourth iconic type is the cool LA type. The person who is a little bit more reserved but asks a lot of questions. But more questions like, where'd you get that information from? How did you come to that? I call the cool LA type the cousin Albert type, the Albert Einstein type.
That's very interesting because I would not think that the LA laid back would ask such drilling questions. To me, it seems more like a New Yorker who would ask those kind of questions.
Well, interestingly enough, the New York type, the Donald and the Oprah type, they're more tellers. They like to tell you what to do. They're not as much in the asking mode. A good reporter is probably not a good Oprah type. That would be more of an Al Roker, or that's why Albert Einstein was so successful, because he asked all those questions. Why is the world like it is today? Why, can we not go faster than the speed of light? This is the brilliant Albert Einstein type. Now, we each have, a part of this type within us. Right. One is more predominant. Okay, we each have a predominant type. Like, for example, probably have guessed in your audience as well that I'm the Oprah type, and damn proud of it. But my secondary type, interestingly enough, which I don't let a lot of people see, especially when I'm in my role of selling, is the Donald type. So, Barry, if you were to come to me, you might find, and you wanted to sell me something, or for me something, my Donald might just come zipping right out there like, okay, Barry, let's get to the point, come on. What do you mean by that?
Very quick,
very direct. I want you, no more small talk. Whereas the Oprahs, of course, we love to talk. How are you? How are the kids? But when they get in the Donald mode,
they want the information, they want to sell it, they want to make a decision and move on to the next.
Exactly. And that for like the Al Roker type, oh, that's so difficult because that's their most difficult type. Here's it's actually the opposite side of the quadrant. Here, instead of, here's reserved, he's warm, he's New York, he's LA. So what we help you learn is the platinum rule.
And when that is?
Do unto others as they want you to do unto them.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Because you asked me a question a little earlier, and how did you get to where you are and things like that. Well, I realized I was really successful with a lot of people, but I sure wasn't successful with a lot of others. Some people, it was just so easy for me to sell and be with and help. And like others, like the Einstein types, they wanted all that information. They wanted it in writing, detail upon detail. Oh my gosh, it would drive me nuts. And then I began to see a pattern rising. Aha, this is how that person processes information. They process information differently than I do. I need to process information, a big picture.
Right. And
when you're an Einstein type, you need to really be sure that you've got all the details. Of course, that's my weakness. And you certainly, like, for example, in real estate, you wouldn't want me to be the one to figure out the square feet, or you'd be paying for things you wouldn't even, need. And so all of this, that's what I really talk a lot about in the book, is to be respectful of all these types, because we not only have them in us, but by understanding that this is the way a person is,
you can adapt and do your, you know how to pitch them and know how to adapt yourself to be more comfortable around them. Because some people, like you say, are so analytical that, and that's not your strong strong point.
Right, suit.
Oh, there were, like a lot of this analytical stuff is not so much mine, it's more of the big picture where I can analyze something really quickly and then I want to move on. So, like until I grasp something, like a little technical point, we can't go anywhere. And then once I grasp it, I see the entire picture. So it's really interesting.
Well, what you were saying also brings up another point. None of us are just one type. We have this secondary type, and many people have a really important tertiary type.
Tertiary?
Yeah, the third type, within them. And again, it depends on the situation. I'm very Oprah when I'm the salesperson, but when I am the vendor, but when I'm the vendee, my Donald kind of comes out more.
I think it has to do with the fact that we're salespeople and we just want to get to the facts because we don't need all the other Oprah information.
Possibly, but it's just a lot of, I've seen salespeople who have that other, who were very much an Oprah type, and then have the Al Roker as their secondary. I love those people. And one of the things, and I think the book expands to meet the needs of many more people than just salespeople, is we think it's all about relationships. I learned a lot from selling. I learned who to marry.
Ah, very interesting.
Because I read this book about how to get a man to marry you.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, oh, well, that's great. And what she really talked about was the mirroring techniques of mirroring yourself with the person that you're sitting across from. And that people really never know that you're mirroring them, acting as if they are. Like if they're slow talking, then you slow up. You know, if they are fast talking, then you better, you know, talk a little faster, be more New York if that's not your speed. Because people feel comfortable with you when you're more like them.
Well, that, I think, goes back to selling.
Exactly.
If they can relate to you, then they feel more comfortable. And it's, I understand. I hope that our audience understands.
I hope so
it's
too.
being like, okay, I mean, it's like if the person is jovial, try to be jovial.
Right.
Or at least laugh at their jokes. Even though you can't stand their jokes, laugh at their jokes.
Here's a good example. You know, I don't know, but sometimes when I call up customer service and I have a major problem and I get this, well, how are you doing this morning? How are you? And just such high-pitched voice. And I'm really not in the mood to be gabby. I want to get right to the point. We have a problem here. And sometimes our customer service people don't recognize the state or the personality that a person may be in at that moment. Could be the most lovely person in the world, but maybe their, you know, water tank broke, and they're not in, you know, am I servicing you right? Am I doing all this? They're not ready for the survey at that point. They just want to get things fixed.
I think they're overtrained to be gracious.
Yes.
And it can be very irritating.
It can be, exactly. Of course, we don't have to have that problem here in New York, but in other parts. But kind of getting back to that idea of relating, and I'm very lucky because I'm married to this wonderful man, and he is an Al Roker type. My first husband, who was a very wonderful human being, was much too cool for me. He was much too analytical. He was the Einstein type. And a person like me, who's a warm type, really feels much more comfortable with another warm type. And it's nicer when the person is the LA type, because here I like to tell people what to do, and the LA people like to ask people, so it's a perfect marriage and a perfect match. And so
wonderful.
That's what I think a lot of women, in particular, don't really understand who they are. And you really need to know what personality type you are, what your strengths are, so when you're with someone that maybe you're looking for as a mate, spouse, that complements you, that it feels good with you. So this is the next book.
Do you find there's a lot of differences between the way a man sells and the way a woman sells?
Good salespeople, I think, are great salespeople. Actually, when I first started, there was a guy that everyone trusted, and I really wanted to be like him. And I felt, quote, in the old days, that men were more trustworthy. You know, they said that women didn't have a trustworthiness about them.
That's
Remember?
very interesting.
Yes, that's why financial institutions wouldn't hire women, why voiceovers wouldn't hire women. Men were supposed to be the trusted type. Well, I think actually we've come now to the point where I think women are the more trusted type, because
Finally,
it's taken a while, but what I saw in this guy was that he showed that he cared about other people, he listened, he asked the right questions, and when he responded to people, which is our step 4, the presentation step, he didn't just present, he responded to what their needs were. Oh, you said to me that you needed this in a home. Well, here I think is something that you would appreciate. You said that you wanted that. Well, I don't know if you noticed this about the house. Responding, you know, word for word. So then this is your presentation, but it's really a response, which leads to that all-important close, step 4.5, because that's what you're there for.
asking for the sale.
Asking for the sale. If you think it's the right situation, then it's your job to help that person buy that home. You know, by understanding them, relating to them, showing them the positives, but really not so much showing, but kind of letting them draw it out. Particularly, I think, actually in real estate even more than in anything else.
Right, you have to zero in on what they want.
Right.
Because if not, everybody's losing here.
Exactly.
One of the things that you were telling me is that your book was translated into Japanese. Now, Japanese culture is very male-oriented. How did you happen to be translated your book, Selling Without Selling, into Japanese as a woman. I don't know how else to ask this question.
You did it beautifully.
Okay.
Because I actually asked my publisher, which is Amicom Books, American Management Association. Now tell me, I'm not yet, but I hope to be soon, a household name. In fact, our book is also translated into Spanish. But why the Japanese? I mean, their culture, as you said, is so male-oriented. Why did they choose my book as the book that the top publishing company, Diamond Publishing, who published Peter Drucker's works, translated into Japanese? And they wrote me back that they thought the concepts that I talk about are universal. People can relate to them all over the world. Secondly, that I've been the top person and proved myself in global companies like Time Warner and 3M. And finally, and I thought this was the most important thing, was they were interested in listening to a woman's point of view.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
That is quite a compliment.
I don't even know, at first I was so thrilled, to have my book published, but I think actually having it translated into Japanese is maybe even the best.
That is terrific. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've learned something about selling, because I know I have. We'd love to hear from you. Carol will answer any of your questions, so please write us at The Women's Connection. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye now.